They blocked off his only road, thinking an old man wouldn't push back. Instead, he turned the tables, built a toll gate, and made them pay just to get to work. Every single day. Calvin Merriweather had never been the kind of man to rush. At 62, he moved like someone who understood the value of patience, of standing still and letting the noise pass. For most of his life, he worked in San Bernardino, California, in the Public Works Department, fixing potholes, coordinating road crews, and dealing with bureaucrats who barely remembered his name once their sidewalks were smooth again. 38 years of back-breaking labor and bureaucratic nonsense. But now, he was done. He used his retirement payout and savings to buy a plot of land just outside Bastrop, Texas, about 30 miles east of Austin. It wasn't pretty in the traditional sense. Dry patches, a beat-up shed, weeds climbing over a rusted fence. But when Calvin stood in the middle of it, boots buried in dust, he saw something no one else could. Possibility. He wasn't looking for luxury. Calvin wanted chickens, maybe a few goats, space for a horse or two, and land to teach kids from town how to grow tomatoes and dig irrigation trenches without YouTube. He imagined long mornings with black coffee and a thermos in hand, walking the perimeter with his dog, Luther. This was supposed to be peace. A man, his land, and silence. The real estate agent had mentioned the HOA in passing. They're technically for the subdivision next door. You're outside their boundary, so it shouldn't matter. Calvin remembered nodding. He wasn't worried. He had no plans to build a mansion or throw raves. He just wanted to plant okra and fix that old water pump near the fence line. 3 weeks in, he started clearing debris. Brought in a crew from Lockhart to haul off the rusted-out trailer and old roofing sheets. Every day he'd wear the same wide-brimmed hat and grease-stained shirt, waving to the same white SUV that drove past his entrance. No wave back, just a slow roll, tinted windows, and brake lights tapping for a few seconds before moving on. Then, one afternoon, a woman stepped out of that SUV. Her name was Rita Halbrook, president of the Briar Meadows HOA. She didn't offer a handshake. "This land used to be part of the Glenford parcel," she said, flipping through papers she'd printed from the county website. "You're aware of that, right?" Calvin shrugged. "Don't matter much. It's mine now." Paid cash. Rita smiled like someone who didn't hear what she didn't like. "We just want to make sure you maintain visual continuity with the neighborhood. We have guidelines for fencing, paint colors, landscaping even." "I'm not part of your HOA," Calvin said plainly. "Y'all don't cover this lot." She gave a soft laugh. "Sure, but we care about the overall aesthetic of the community. Sometimes these things spill over." Calvin didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He just turned and walked back toward the shed, Luther trailing behind. He'd heard enough coded warnings in his lifetime to know when someone was talking around their point. He figured that'd be the end of it. But what came next wasn't a request. It was a blockade. 2 mornings later, Calvin woke up early, like always. The kind of early where the grass is still wet and the air bites just enough to keep you sharp. He poured himself a mug of burnt coffee, grabbed his flannel from the hook by the door, and stepped outside with Luther close behind. That's when he saw it. A chain-link fence, brand new and shining like a threat, ran across the only paved access road that led to his front gate. At first, Calvin just stared. No sign. No notice. Just steel links tied tight, blocking the road like it had always been there. Whoever did it had worked overnight, and they'd worked fast. He walked up to it, examined the posts. Concrete still soft around the base. His truck was on his side, thank God, but no one had even bothered to tell him it was happening. His property wasn't part of the Briar Meadows subdivision, but this road, as it turned out, passed near enough to give them just enough reason to meddle. Later that afternoon, Calvin knocked on the HOA's community center door. No one answered. He left a note. No reply. 3 days passed. Deliveries stopped. The mail carrier didn't even try anymore. A propane tank delivery guy called him cursing, said he wasn't risking a back injury dragging the cylinder across 2 acres of gravel just because some folks don't want you on their road. On the 5th day, Calvin drove out to City Hall. He sat with a clerk named Dale, who wore suspenders and looked like he was counting the minutes until his pension kicked in. Dale pulled up a map, scratched his head, and muttered, "Technically, they don't own that stretch. It's a weird overlap. Old easement tied up in grandfathered deeds." "So what does that mean?" Calvin asked. "It means they can try to make noise," Dale said, "but they can't make it stick. It's still your only legal access." Still, nothing happened. Calvin tried reaching Rita again. Emailed the HOA board. Drove around to find one of the other members. He finally cornered a man named Phil McKinnon, vice president, while he was tending roses in his front yard. "Look," Phil said, squinting toward the sun. "I get it. You bought the place. You want your space. But the folks in Briar Meadows have concerns. Property values, security. A lot of people move out here for the controlled look of the neighborhood." Calvin raised an eyebrow. "I don't live in y'all's neighborhood." Phil smiled tight. "The community is bigger than the map. It's a feeling." Calvin didn't respond. He didn't need to. He just stared until Phil looked back down at his shears and pretended to care about pruning. From then on, everything got harder. Trash pickup stopped. UPS started dropping his packages at the post office instead. One morning, Calvin found tire marks across the edge of his pasture, deep and deliberate, like someone had spun out for fun. No one came forward. Then came the incident that changed everything. It was his niece, Alyssa, who'd just turned 30 and had been staying with him for a few weeks. She had kidney problems and needed dialysis twice a week at the clinic in Elgin. Calvin had arranged for a transportation service to pick her up when he couldn't drive. That Tuesday, the driver called in a panic. "I can't reach your gate. Road's blocked. GPS won't reroute." Calvin rushed down to meet him at the fence. The driver stood there, confused and sweating, looking at the steel barrier like it was part of a different country. They missed the appointment. That night, Alyssa lay on the couch looking pale, her skin tight and eyes rimmed red. "Uncle Cal," she said softly, "are they allowed to do this?" He didn't answer right away. Just sat on the porch, staring at the fence like it had insulted him personally. Then he stood up and said, "No, but I got something better than yelling. But when you fight folks with pens and bylaws, you don't swing fists, you flip the rules upside down." The following morning, Calvin drove straight to the county clerk's office in Bastrop. Not out of rage, he wasn't built that way, but with the quiet determination of a man who'd been disrespected too many times in his life to let this one slide. The clerk, a woman named Shelby Cantor, was younger than she looked on her business card, and didn't seem all that eager to get involved until Calvin laid out a folder of neatly stacked documents. Deed, plat map, boundary survey, all in order. "Sir," Shelby said slowly, scanning the files, "this strip right here, this access road, they've got no claim on it. It's not part of their subdivision. They just assumed no one would fight back." Calvin didn't nod or smile. He just pointed at a small section on the map. "What if I re-register that strip as private? Not public use anymore. Just a privately managed access path that cuts through my land. You think the county would allow it?" Shelby hesitated. "You'd need permits, a zoning review, maybe a lawyer." "I've got the time," Calvin replied. "And a retirement check with no golf habit." That's how it started. No grand speech, no cameras, just paperwork. Calvin hired a local land use attorney named Elias Drew, who'd spent most of his career helping ranchers get around tangled Texas land ordinances. Elias was sharp, wore worn boots to court, and had a thing for chewing sunflower seeds in meetings. "They think you're old and out here planting tomatoes," Elias said during their first meeting. "Good. Let 'em." Weeks passed. While the HOA board sent each other self-congratulatory emails about maintaining boundaries, Calvin and Elias rewrote the boundaries themselves. The new gate permit was approved. The zoning paperwork went through without a hiccup. The moment the private access designation was finalized, Calvin ordered the gate. Steel frame, keypad access, solar-powered backup, with plate recognition software. He paid for it all in cash. On installation day, a couple neighbors from across the main road stood at a distance, whispering behind mirrored sunglasses as the crew drilled anchor holes. One guy shouted, "What's the toll, cowboy?" with a half laugh. Calvin ignored him. By Friday, the gate was live, a tall, black iron mouth with arms ready to swing open, but only for those who belonged. Calvin programmed it himself. Registered license plates for emergency services, his niece, and a few friends. Everyone else? Toll required. At first, people thought it was a bluff. Then they realized it wasn't. The entrance they'd once treated like a convenience, cutting through Calvin's land to bypass the four-way stop at State Highway 21, was no longer free. A $5 toll, charged automatically via plate scanner, payable through a third-party portal. No pay, no pass. If they tried to cut through without authorization, the camera system triggered an alert. Repeat offenders got blocked. Some even got mailed warnings. Rita Halbrook was furious. She called Calvin personally. "You've created a traffic hazard," she hissed through the phone. "You can't charge people to access a public road." Calvin calmly replied, "It's not a public road anymore, Ms. Halbrook. It runs across my land. Your fence forced that hand." Click. Within days, HOA board members started showing up late to work. Delivery vans began turning back to go the long way. Parents dropping off their kids at the elementary school had to sit through 2 extra intersections during peak traffic. The subdivision's Facebook group was a mess. Some posts accused Calvin of extortion. Others said he was a genius. Someone uploaded a blurry photo of him drinking lemonade on his porch while a neighbor in a Lexus sat fuming at the closed gate. He never responded, never posted, just waited. Then came the press. A reporter from a local station in Austin showed up one morning, skinny mic in hand, asking for a statement. Calvin gave him 30 words. "If you block a man's home, don't be surprised when he builds the way out himself. Fair's fair." The clip aired that night. Viewers flooded the comments, many siding with Calvin. Some called him a hero, others said he should sue. But Calvin didn't want to fight. He just wanted his road back. Still, the spotlight had only just started to shine. Calvin had never been interested in making the news. He didn't need validation from strangers or applause from a screen. But when Alyssa saw the clip of him on TV, she beamed with a mix of pride and relief. "They're finally listening," she said from the couch, legs wrapped in a quilt, dialysis bandage still fresh on her arm. "You stood up." Calvin gave a slight nod, but the moment passed too quickly for him to enjoy it. There were still deliveries that hadn't restarted, and Alyssa still needed rides twice a week until the transport company agreed to reroute. He called the clinic personally, explained the situation, and paid extra out of pocket for a private driver. The clinic offered sympathy but no solutions. Bureaucracy, like always, moved slower than need. Then, one morning, a handwritten letter showed up in Calvin's mailbox. No stamp, just folded in half and slid between 2 bills. "We don't want trouble. You've made your point. Maybe it's time to compromise." No name, no return address, but the handwriting matched the cursive slant Rita had used when she filled out a notice on his property earlier that month. He crumpled it and threw it in the burn barrel out back. The next day, Alyssa was in the kitchen cutting apples when she paused, knife mid-air. "Uncle Cal," she said, "somebody's parked by the fence." He walked out with Luther at his side. A navy blue Audi idled near the new gate, driver inside wearing sunglasses and pretending to scroll on their phone. Calvin didn't say anything. He just took out his phone and opened the gate remotely. The car didn't move. 5 minutes later, it drove off the other way. No toll paid. No words exchanged. These little games continued for a while. Anonymous letters, engine noises late at night. Once someone threw a fast food cup full of soda at the keypad. The liquid fried the touchscreen for 2 days before a replacement part arrived. Alyssa started sleeping with her light on. Calvin reinforced the camera system. Still, he didn't react the way they expected. No shouting, no confrontation. He just documented everything. Dates, times, license plates. Meanwhile, his gate fund grew. He redirected the toll money into a separate account. By the end of the 3rd week, nearly $1,200 had come in. Calvin wasn't getting rich, but he didn't want to. What he wanted was to make a point so clear it didn't need repeating. The toll wasn't about money. It was about access. It was about respect. Then something happened that even Calvin didn't see coming. A neighbor from Briar Meadows, Luis Navarez, a high school history teacher, knocked on his gate, waving a $20 bill and smiling nervously. "I'm not here to start anything," he said. "I just wanted to apologize. Some of us don't agree with what they did. You got done wrong." Calvin raised an eyebrow. "You coming through?" "No," Luis chuckled. "Just wanted to say my piece." He left the $20 anyway, saying it was for repairs to the soda incident. Word must have gotten around, because after that, other neighbors began reaching out. A young couple dropped off homemade tamales with a note, "We're sorry, we didn't know the whole story." A teenage girl with her learner's permit asked if she could volunteer on weekends to help Calvin with the chickens he'd just started raising. Not everyone changed. Rita was still furious. Phil stopped waving, but a few cracks had started forming in the HOA's smug surface. Still, the fence hadn't moved. The road remained blocked from the other end. The HOA pretended like the toll gate didn't exist, as if silence would erase it. Calvin knew better. The longer they refused to acknowledge the consequences of their decisions, the more isolated they became, even from their own people. One night, Alyssa sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around her. "I know you're doing all this to protect us," she said, her voice soft, "but it's more than that, isn't it?" Calvin nodded once. "You don't spend a lifetime following rules, only to let someone rewrite them when it suits them." But even Calvin didn't realize how far they'd try to push him before backing off. It was early March when Calvin received a certified letter from the Briar Meadows HOA. Thick envelope, gold seal, legal letterhead that probably cost more than it was worth. The language was carefully crafted, dressed up to sound reasonable. It accused him of creating a hardship for the community, of obstructing long-standing access, and operating an unauthorized toll system on what they called a community-adjacent road. He read the letter twice, then laughed. "They really think they can bluff their way into my driveway," he muttered, handing it to Elias, his lawyer, later that week. Elias read through it, deadpan. "It's fluff. There's no enforceable claim. They're hoping you don't know your rights, or that you'll cave to pressure. They're fishing. Well," Calvin said, "I'm not biting." They drafted a response. Straightforward. No legal theatrics. Just a firm reminder that the HOA had no legal jurisdiction over the parcel in question. That the road in question had been privately reclassified in accordance with county zoning law, and that the toll was being collected in full compliance with local transportation ordinances. But Calvin didn't stop there. He filed a public notice of intent to expand the private road classification, not just the gate, but the entire stretch leading up to it. It would now be considered a maintenance zone, eligible for traffic calming measures. That included temporary stop signs, adjustable speed bumps, and optional gravel patches designed to encourage reduced usage by non-residents. In short, they were going to hate it. He hired a landscaping crew to dig trenches and install flexible bollards. Not permanent ones, just enough to slow things down and require attention. The irony? Most of the materials were sourced from the same supply contractor that served the Briar Meadows maintenance team. As construction began, the reactions were immediate. HOA board members drove up in disbelief, watching workers install signs that read, "Private road, access by permission, only all vehicles subject to toll fee and video monitoring." Calvin stood nearby in a folding chair, sipping iced tea like it was just another Tuesday. A few tried to argue, but the workers ignored them. One woman, red-faced and muttering about her property value, took photos with her phone and yelled about lawsuits. Calvin raised his teacup in salute. That night, the subdivision's Facebook group exploded. Some residents blamed Rita. Others called for a vote to dissolve the board entirely. One post read, "He's doing everything legally. Why did we even build that fence?" Another asked bluntly, "Has anyone apologized to the man?" But the board didn't budge. So Calvin leaned in harder. He lowered the toll to $3 for registered license plates, but raised it to $15 for unregistered vehicles with multiple crossings in a single day. That hit contractors, landscapers, babysitters, all the people the HOA relied on to keep their subdivision polished. And now, those people were knocking on Calvin's gate, asking for receipts, trying to get reimbursed. The pressure worked. One evening, a minivan pulled up. A man in his 40s stepped out, holding a baby carrier in one arm. His name was Desmond Keeler, a father of 3 who'd lived in Briar Meadows for 6 years. "I'm sorry to bother you, sir," he said, "but this gate's got my wife driving the long way every morning, and she's got a newborn and a job in Waco. I heard you're not unreasonable. Can we register our plate?" Calvin nodded slowly. "I'm not here to punish folks, just protect my land. Send me your plate number. I'll waive the fee." Desmond looked surprised. "Really? I don't want your money. I want your HOA to respect boundaries." Word spread again. People started separating Calvin from the board. Cars slowed at the gate but didn't honk. A few left thank you notes in the mailbox. One kid even painted a little wooden sign that said, "Mr. Calvin's Road," and stuck it in the dirt beside the keypad. But Rita wasn't done. The next week, the HOA filed an official complaint with the Bastrop County Planning Commission, accusing Calvin of violating neighborhood harmony standards. No such statute existed for unincorporated land. The commission threw it out in 10 minutes. Elias framed the rejection letter and gave it to Calvin as a gift. It sat on the shelf above his old CB radio. But pride has a way of digging its heels in, and the HOA wasn't finished digging yet. By early April, the road had a rhythm. The gate clicked open like clockwork for Calvin, Alyssa, and a growing list of registered users. For everyone else, it became a roll of the dice. Pay the toll, wait for the system, or go the long way around. And if you tried to skip the toll, the cameras caught it. The invoices came in the mail. And if you ignored them long enough, a small claims notice followed. Calvin wasn't being spiteful. He was being methodical. Rita, however, was getting sloppy. Her latest move came in the form of a town hall meeting, not an official one, just a gathering she called at the Briar Meadows Community Center. Fold-out chairs, bad coffee, clipboards. She used the words public safety, precedent, and community character like weapons. What she didn't expect was who showed up. Desmond Keeler stood up and told the room about driving 30 extra miles every week because of a grudge. Luis Navarez talked about the kids he taught who asked why a grown man had to charge a toll just to keep people off his land. And then there was Trina Baxley, a retired nurse who'd lived in the subdivision longer than any of them. She stood slowly, leaning on a cane, and said, "You all talk about protecting the neighborhood, but you never once asked why that man put up a gate. Maybe if we spent less time policing his fence and more time minding our own, we wouldn't be in this mess." That video clip made it online. Within 48 hours, a local news blogger picked it up, then a regional radio station. Calvin's Gate became a symbol of property rights, of quiet resistance, of drawing the line and daring someone to cross it. Some folks treated it like a joke. Others treated it like gospel. But the story didn't end there. Late one night, Calvin was reviewing toll logs when he saw something strange. The same car, a white sedan with a personalized plate, had attempted to force the gate twice. Both times it backed out, but the second time it lingered for 8 minutes with its engine running. That wasn't a mistake. That was a warning. He forwarded the footage to Elias, who then forwarded it to the sheriff's office. No response for 3 days. Then Luther got sick. The vet said it was likely baited meat, hot dogs laced with something that messed with the dog's liver. Alyssa cried. Calvin didn't. He just got quieter. Security was upgraded. Additional cameras went up. The gate system was rerouted through a private server Elias had helped him build. He added solar floodlights and began logging every vehicle, every hour. At night, he started keeping a shotgun by the door. Not to use, but to remind himself he was still in control. One afternoon, a white pickup with county tags pulled up. The man behind the wheel wore aviators and introduced himself as Deputy Trey Langford. "Got a call about someone complaining you're extorting folks with this toll," the deputy said. Calvin nodded. "And?" Langford shrugged. "It's legal. Just needed to check it out. Off the record, If I had neighbours like yours, I'd charge double. They talked for 10 minutes. Langford left with a dozen eggs from Calvin's new coop and a story to tell back at the station. The more pressure the HOA applied, the more support Calvin gained. He hadn't intended to be anyone's symbol, but that's what was happening. People started stopping by the gate just to take pictures. A biker group from San Marcos mailed him a leather patch that read, "Hold the line." Even the town mayor, quietly, through Elias, sent word that the city wouldn't interfere unless something serious escalated. And that was the irony. The more the HOA tried to isolate him, the more connected Calvin became. With the town, with people who understood what it meant to be boxed in, with folks who had their own fences to fight. Calvin sat on the porch one night, Alyssa beside him, both of them silent as the stars blinked overhead. "You ever think it'd go this far?" she asked. He shook his head. "Didn't plan it, just wanted my peace." She leaned against his shoulder. "Well, now you've got a toll booth and a fan base." He smiled, barely. "Ain't what I asked for, but it's what they gave me." But while the gate stood firm, something else was about to give, and this time it wouldn't be Calvin. By mid-spring, the subdivision wasn't just divided, it was crumbling from the inside. The very HOA that once moved like a single voice had fractured. Whispered conversations turned into shouting matches during board meetings. 3 members stepped down within the same month, citing internal disagreements and personal harassment. Someone even spray-painted "Rita's fence, Rita's mess" across the side of the HOA clubhouse in red paint. It was cleaned up quickly, but people took pictures first. The internet never forgets. Rita doubled down. She held emergency sessions, sent out printed newsletters that read like political manifestos. One page had an aerial photo of Calvin's property with bold red arrows pointing at the toll gate and a caption that read, "A threat to our peace." Calvin framed it and hung it inside the shed. Meanwhile, more and more residents quietly slipped him their license plate numbers. He didn't charge most of them anymore. They weren't the problem. They were just people trying to get to work or pick up groceries without navigating a maze. A retired school bus driver offered to repaint his mailbox for free. A woman named Chandra Ballantyne, who ran a gardening blog out of her 2-bedroom ranch-style house, started dropping off cuttings, heirloom tomatoes, basil, lavender. "Just figured your soil could use some joy," she said. That stuck with him. But joy was in short supply over in Briar Meadows. Real estate agents started calling the HOA office. Potential buyers were backing out once they learned about the gate. One online review of the neighborhood read, "Nice homes, bad politics, and a toll road in the middle of nowhere." The board had no answers. To make things worse, a leak, likely from one of the former members, released internal emails showing that Rita had coordinated the original fence project without board-wide approval, that she'd paid for the labor from the HOA's emergency maintenance fund, citing landscape corrections. The emails were damning. Elias sent a copy to Calvin with a note scribbled at the bottom. They blinked. Calvin didn't celebrate. He didn't need to. He knew what happened to people like Rita when the pressure got too high. They cracked, and when they did, they tried to pull someone down with them. Sure enough, that Sunday, she showed up. Dressed in a white cardigan, sunglasses perched on her head, and heels completely wrong for gravel, Rita stood just outside the gate. Calvin watched her through the camera, arms crossed, unmoved. She didn't press the call button. She stood there for 6 minutes, then finally walked away. The next morning, Calvin found a new letter in his mailbox. This one signed "Official" on HOA letterhead. "We are formally requesting a mutual resolution. A proposal to remove the fence on our end in exchange for the deactivation of the toll system. Let's end this with civility and understanding." Calvin read it 3 times. The tone was different. Not threatening. Not warm either. Just tired. He didn't answer right away. That evening he walked the length of the road, boots kicking at gravel, Luther trailing a few feet behind, still a little sluggish from his recovery, but strong enough to follow. The sun was low, and for a brief moment everything glowed gold. The land, the gate, the fence in the distance. He stopped at the edge and stared through the links. No one on the other side. No cars, no noise. Alyssa joined him a few minutes later, sipping on sweet tea. "They're waving a flag," she said. "Not white, just beige," he replied. She smiled. "You thinking of backing down?" Calvin didn't answer right away. "I didn't build that gate out of spite. I built it because they thought they could push me around and keep smiling while doing it." He looked at the fence again, steel links catching the last light. "I ain't taking it down. Not yet." But as lines blurred between battle and resolution, Calvin was about to face a different kind of decision, one that had less to do with fences and more to do with forgiveness. By the time summer rolled in, the heat wasn't just rising from the pavement. It was baked into every conversation, every sideways glance from across a grocery aisle, every new letter slipped under Calvin's gate. The war may have been tipping in his favor, but it didn't come without bruises. Alyssa had taken to writing in a journal every evening, something she hadn't done since college. One night, Calvin asked her what she was scribbling about. She just shrugged and said, "Trying to make sense of all this without yelling." That hit him harder than he expected. Calvin had always been good at keeping things inside. Born in Tulsa, raised by his grandfather after his parents passed when he was still in middle school. That old man used to say, "You want to know who a man is? Don't listen to what he says. Watch where he stands when things get loud." That's the code Calvin lived by. He'd faced all kinds of nonsense in his life, at work, in banks, buying cars, renting apartments. Nothing ever outright, never loud enough to catch on tape. But always just enough to remind him the rules weren't made with people like him in mind. So when Rita and her fence showed up, it wasn't just about that piece of road. It was about all the quiet walls he'd been forced to smile through his whole life. But standing your ground has a weight to it. The long days fixing things by hand, the paperwork, the long, quiet stares at the fence that never moved unless you forced it. Even Luther had changed, more watchful, less playful. The land still held its peace, but now it came with cameras and passwords. He missed the version of himself that thought chickens and tomato plants were enough. That version of him had started a compost pile and planned to build a greenhouse. This version spent evenings checking battery backups and saving footage to hard drives, just in case. Sometimes at night, he'd sit in the shed and just listen. Not for noise, but for what wasn't there anymore. He thought about his grandfather, about the fields they used to walk through after church, about how the man had refused to sell their house during the zoning dispute, even when the city tried to cut off their utilities. "You don't leave just because someone makes it hard," he'd said. But Calvin also remembered the price his grandfather paid. The strokes, the silence, the weariness that came from fighting battles nobody thanked you for. One morning, Alyssa brought him breakfast. Biscuits, bacon, and a paper napkin that had, "You're still you," written in pen at the bottom. He didn't ask, just nodded and took a bite. That same afternoon, Elias called. "You've got leverage now," he said. "They're folding. You can ask for the fence to come down officially. File a cease order. Maybe even damages if you wanted to push it." But Calvin didn't answer right away. "What if I don't want a win that looks like punishment?" he finally asked. Elias paused. "Then maybe it's not a win. Maybe it's a peace." That stuck with Calvin. That night, he walked the length of the road again, slower this time. He stopped midway and sat on an overturned feed bucket, watching the tree line dance in the dusk breeze. He thought about every man he'd known who never bent, who stood so tall they cracked their own backs trying to stay straight. He didn't want to become that. Maybe this whole thing was never about the toll. Maybe it was about making sure they felt the inconvenience they thought they had the right to create for him, and now they had. They'd felt it, lived it, paid for it, literally and metaphorically. The world knew. The community knew. But now he had to decide how much more he needed them to hurt to feel whole again. Because sometimes the hardest fences to tear down aren't made of metal. They're made of pride. 2 days later, Calvin called a meeting. Not in a courtroom, not through lawyers. Just a simple gathering at the edge of his land near the toll gate. No fancy chairs, no podium, just a folding table, a couple coolers of sweet tea, and a plastic tub of paper cups. Alyssa set out 2 fans powered by extension cords. Luther lay in the shade, watching quietly. The invite went out on a handwritten sign by the gate. Community talk. This Saturday at 5 p.m. All welcome. He didn't know who'd come. Maybe no one. Maybe Rita would try to hijack it with legal threats. But by 5:10, more than 40 people had shown up. A few sat on lawn chairs they brought themselves. Others leaned against trucks or stood in small clusters, arms folded but listening. Calvin recognized faces, some friendly, some hesitant, and a few that had once looked right through him. He stood in front of them without a script. "I don't have a microphone," he began. "So if I talk too soft, y'all tell me to speak up. I just wanted to talk, not shout." The crowd quieted. "I didn't put up this gate to make enemies. I put it up because my access was blocked. I didn't start with a toll. I started with a conversation. That got ignored. So I did what I had to, not to get back at anyone, but to stay standing." A few heads nodded. He glanced at Alyssa, who gave him a small smile. "Some of y'all don't know what it's like to feel boxed in without being touched. Fences don't have to be tall to trap you. They can be polite. They can be sneaky. And if you don't push back, you end up disappearing." Someone from the back asked, "What do you want from us now?" Calvin didn't miss a beat. "Respect. Not apologies. Not gifts. Just respect for the land, for the boundaries, for the space I've carved out without asking y'all for anything." He paused, then said something even he hadn't planned. "And I want to take the toll gate down." Murmurs rippled through the group. Someone gasped audibly. "I'm not doing it to surrender," he said. "I'm doing it because you've seen what happens when you push a man too far. You've felt what it's like to be slowed down, to lose access, to be told no. Maybe now you'll think twice before doing it to the next person." He looked directly at Rita, standing stiff near the back in a pressed blouse and crossed arms. "I won't forget what was done. But I won't carry it around like a badge either. I'm tired. I want to raise chickens, teach some kids how to work the soil, and live like I planned to when I first bought this land." Then he added, quieter, "And I don't want my niece to grow up thinking the only way to be heard is through conflict." The crowd stood still. It was Chandra Ballantyne who stepped forward first, placing a mason jar of honey on the table. "For your tea," she said. Then Desmond approached, shook Calvin's hand and said, "Thank you for not giving up on us, even when we didn't deserve your patience." Even Rita, though she didn't say a word, gave a small, respectful nod before walking off with her heels crunching gravel. Within the week, Calvin began disassembling the toll gate, piece by piece, with help from a couple of local teenagers he'd hired for the summer. He left the camera system, not as a threat, but as a quiet reminder. Respect lives where accountability does. The fence on the HOA side came down the following month. No big announcement, just gone one morning like it had never been there. In its place, a low wooden post with a reflective marker, simple, non-confrontational, and most importantly, no longer a wall. Traffic flowed again. The story faded from local news, but not from memory. People remembered the gate, not just because it was real, but because it showed them something uncomfortable. They'd let convenience blind them to injustice. Calvin didn't become a hero by shouting. He did it by standing still when it counted. He planted new rows of tomatoes that fall, built a chicken run with his own hands. And on Saturdays, a few neighborhood kids came by to learn how to hammer nails, build raised beds, and understand the difference between standing your ground and picking a fight. But Calvin's real harvest wasn't in eggs or squash. It was in knowing he didn't just hold his ground. He raised it up for others to walk on too. The gate was gone. The fence was gone. But what remained was something far more lasting than steel or wire. Calvin Merriweather sat on his porch one quiet evening. Same old chair, same flannel draped over the back. Luther rested at his feet, one ear twitching at a distant cicada. Alyssa was inside, boiling water for sweet tea and singing something soft under her breath. For the first time in months, there was nothing to monitor, nothing to defend, nothing to fix, just the land. Just the stillness he'd been chasing since the day he signed those papers. He watched a neighbor's car roll by. No gate to stop it now, no camera flash, no invoice to follow. They waved. This time, the hand didn't hesitate. It wasn't forced. It was real. Calvin nodded once. That was enough. He thought about how this whole thing started, not with confrontation, but with assumption, not with violence, but with quiet control. A fence put up without consent. A man's access denied because some people decided his presence didn't fit their plans. He didn't burn anything down. He didn't threaten anyone. He just forced them to feel what they made him feel. Inconvenience, delay, frustration. And in doing so, he gave them a choice. They could see him as the enemy, or they could see themselves more clearly. Some of them chose to see. Not all, but enough. That's the thing about standing your ground. It doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes with bruise and silence and long nights where you wonder if any of it mattered. But if you hold steady, if you make your boundary clear, not with hate, but with principle, eventually people stop asking why you built the wall and start wondering why they ignored the line. Calvin didn't forgive everyone, and he didn't forget what was done. But he chose peace over punishment. Not because they deserved it, but because he did. He deserved mornings without tension, land without surveillance. A home, not a battlefield. He turned pain into policy, resistance into reason, and somehow, along the way, a gate built out of frustration became a mirror for an entire neighborhood. He leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking beneath him. "You think they'll remember?" Alyssa asked, stepping onto the porch with 2 cups of tea. "They'll remember," he said. "Maybe not my name, but they'll remember they couldn't fence a man off his own land and walk away clean." She sat beside him, handed him a cup, then added, "You think you'll ever have to do something like that again?" Calvin took a slow sip. "Lord, I hope not. But if they try, I've still got the keypad in the shed." They both laughed, and that was the moment. Not dramatic, not loud, just 2 people sharing tea on land they refused to be pushed off of. That's how change lasts. Not through viral headlines or shouted slogans, but through daily peace that doesn't beg for permission, through dignity that refuses to shrink. So if you're watching this now, and you've ever been told your presence doesn't belong, or your voice isn't welcome, or your way of living doesn't fit someone else's standard, let Calvin's story sit with you. Don't just react. Think, plan, build. And when someone blocks your road, don't crash through it. Own it. Reinforce it. And if you have to, make them pay to walk the path they took for granted. Because peace isn't given. It's claimed. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you of your own fight, your own land, your own gate, then don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel. Share the story. Remind someone that standing still can be the loudest thing a person ever does.